The multinational Adani Group is rushing ahead with early works for its planned Carmichael coal mine in central Queensland's Galilee Basin. If it is allowed to go ahead, it will be one of the biggest and dirtiest coal mining operations in the world. Experts have given dire warnings about the disastrous consequences that would follow. Adani itself estimates that the mine would produce 2.3 billion tonnes of low-quality, high-ash coal over its estimated 60-year lifespan. This would work out to an additional 128 million tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions each year. It would accelerate climate change when we're already on the brink of a global climate catastrophe. The mine would signal the death knell for the Great Barrier Reef. The reef is already dying because of rising ocean temperatures and water pollution. If Adani's plans are carried out in full, it would make this process irreversible. The Galilee Basin's precious groundwater is also under threat. The Labor state government in Queensland has disgracefully promised Adani unlimited access to this groundwater, with no independent oversight for the entire 60 years of the mine's operation. Allowing this would contaminate groundwater for thousands of square kilometres. This is in an area already afflicted by a serious drought. It would have a devastating impact on struggling farmers in the region, and it would make the water unusable for generations to come. ABC's Four Corners program recently aired a report exposing the Adani Group's atrocious record in India, where it is one of the country's largest companies. 115,000 people die each year in India from air pollution directly caused by Adani's burning of coal. One segment of the report focused on Adani's operations in the Indian state of Karnataka, where they ran an illegal iron ore mining operation. This was eventually laid bare and shut down in what was a major scandal. A statement from Karnataka's environmental ombudsman, who conducted the investigation, compared the conglomerate's behaviour to that of the mafia. Adani violated almost every law on the books. They've been caught out completely ignoring environmental regulations, systematically bribing officials, tax dodging on a massive scale through offshore tax havens, and having a callous disregard for the health of their workers and the local communities affected by their projects. This corporation is as rotten as they come. Because of Adani's dubious finances and the overall uncertainty surrounding the project, even the big banks have been unwilling to back initial investment into the mine. It might come as a surprise then to some people that the Carmichael mine has the full support of both major parties. The Turnbull government and the Palaszczuk state government are almost tripping over themselves to see who can offer the most subsidies, handouts, and interest-free loans to get the mine running. For instance, the federal government's resources minister, Matt Canavan, has indicated that the government will offer $1 billion to build the railway linking the mine to Adani's coal port at Abbott Point. $1 billion is enough to build thousands of new classrooms or provide world-class public transport in a major city. The railway, by the way, will be automated and won't employ any new train drivers. The government has not ruled out further public investment or even insuring the mine with taxpayer money so that Adani still makes profits if the mine goes bankrupt. It's very clear where the political will for this is coming from. There are deep ties between the political establishment and the fossil fuel interest groups. Last year, the Australia Institute and the Australian Conservation Foundation released a report called Greasing the Wheels. It documented the extensive donations to the major parties by mining companies and the revolving door between the political establishment and industry lobby groups. The Adani Group's chairman, Gautam Adani, has personally hosted visits to India by state and federal ministers, including Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. Two Adani lobbyists, Cameron Milner and David Moore, have previously been high-ranking officials in the Labour and Liberal National parties, respectively. Both of them still maintain close relationships with their parties, and Milner was revealed, in fact, to be actively involved in Palaszczuk's re-election campaign. It's no wonder the mine is so unpopular. Just over 2 weeks ago, thousands of people turned out in 45 protests around Australia in a national demonstration against the mine. People gathered on beaches and in parks and formed human chains, spelling the words "Stop Adani" to voice their opposition. These symbolic displays are positive. They show the disgust and the frustration that many people feel about this project, and more broadly, the lack of any serious action on climate change. To really stop Adani, however, the campaign needs to go much further. It has to escalate its tactics and its strategy and cut across the arguments of Adani and the major parties. Trade unions can play a key role in this. The CFMEU, for instance, represents workers in the construction and mining sectors. These workers will play a central role in building and in operating the mine. They could use their collective power to stop works from going ahead. If the unions were to come out against the mine and refuse to cooperate in building it, it would be an enormous blow to Adani's plans. Unfortunately, so far, the union leaders support the mine. They have said it is needed for the jobs it will bring. This is the mine's main and real only selling point. The major parties have leaned on Adani's promise that the Carmichael mine will create 10,000 or more jobs. This is a brazen lie. In 2015, Adani itself was forced to admit in court that the mine would only create an average of 1,464 jobs per year. In addition, the threat it poses to the Great Barrier Reef alone would also wipe out roughly 70,000 jobs in tourism and associated fields. This does not include its impact on farmers or other industries associated. For these reasons alone, it's outrageous that the union leaders have accepted the make-believe job numbers claimed by Adani and given the mine their support. As imaginary as these claims are, they are hugely significant in regional Queensland. There's a very real, pressing need for new, decent jobs in the area. In the last 10 years, living standards have plummeted. Even in regional cities like Townsville, household wealth has fallen more than a quarter since 2009. For that matter, all around Australia, to a varying degree, there is an unemployment and underemployment crisis. According to the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, nationally there are somewhere around 19 job seekers competing for every available job. In some areas, even the official unemployment rate, given by the Bureau of Statistics, is as high as 25%. Absolutely, Adani must be stopped. But in an area crying out for jobs and investment, the environmental movement has to offer an alternative program. We need a rational transition away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. This needs to be done as quickly as possible. It also has to be done in a planned and controlled way, so workers have guaranteed jobs and paid retraining in new industries where appropriate. This is the exact opposite of what has happened with the closure of the Hazelwood Power Station in Victoria, in the Latrobe Valley, where workers have been left in the lurch. Instead of bowing to Adani, the unions must do everything they can to block the mine and demand major public investment in renewable energy. Research has backed up that this would create thousands more jobs than the mining and burning of coal. If the unions did this, it would cut right through Adani's lies about creating employment. It would place enormous pressure on Turnbull's fragile government, and it would also place pressure on the Labor Party. This is the approach that was taken by the Militant Builders Labourers Federation, the BLF, in the 1970s and 80s. In consultation with community groups, this rank-and-file union placed green bans on works that were not in the public interest. They connected the issues of jobs, social needs, and the environment. Through this approach, the BLF was able to save many parklands, public housing blocks, and important heritage buildings from the bulldozers of greedy developers. Sadly, the trade union movement today is a different beast. We need to bring these ideas back into the movement and demand that the union leaders don't go along with the Adani con job. This is a critical task for the campaign against Adani. Getting the unions involved would maximise our impact and make it extremely difficult for the powers that be to get the mine built. Even without the support of the unions, Adani can be stopped by mass community struggle. Another round of national demonstrations would be a good step forward. Ideally, these should be held in city and town centres, where they are the most visible and can attract the most people. Organising mass public meetings to democratically decide on the direction of the campaign would help broaden its reach and get the widest possible layers of people involved. Although the location of the mine is remote, there is scope for a campaign of community picketing to physically prevent its construction. There is a rich history in Australia and all around the world of mass direct action stopping big infrastructure projects in their tracks. Last week, Greens leader Richard Di Natale pointed in this direction. He said he expected thousands of people would be prepared to put their bodies on the line to physically block the construction of the Adani mine. It's very possible that the campaign could develop in this direction. If it does, we think this would represent a major and appropriate step forward, and it would really escalate the resistance in a serious way. This is how the Franklin River Dam was blocked in Tasmania in 1983. It's also how we in the Socialist Party, with a community campaign with us, defeated the East-West Toll Road in 2014. Direct action is at its most powerful when it's backed up by broad public support and when people can be mobilised in great numbers. Both the Franklin River Dam and the East-West Link campaigns were able to force the Labor Party to reluctantly change their position and oppose these projects. For anyone who hasn't read it, our book Beating the Big End of Town explains some of the key lessons that we think are important from the East-West Link campaign. We published it in the hope that it can help inspire and offer guidance to other struggles, like the fight against Adani, and it's available from our online bookshop. Just last year, there was another example of the great power of mass direct action, this time in the United States. The Dakota Access Pipeline was a monster oil duct backed by both the Democrats and the Republicans. It was halted for a time by thousands of environmental and native campaigners who camped out over a period of months to prevent the pipeline's completion. They faced down brutal violence from the National Guard, riot police, and private security firms equipped with military equipment and sent in by the pipeline's backers. When this movement drew in support from US Army veterans, the Obama administration was compelled to suspend works on the pipeline. They were clearly worried about the real possibility of their state machine unravelling if the veterans made an appeal to current members of the police and army and so on. This was a major victory for the movement, but it was temporary. While the works were suspended, the protest camps began to dwindle and dissipate. The movement lost its momentum, with many people seeing it as a job done. When Donald Trump became president earlier this year, works resumed on the pipeline almost immediately. By February, the police had cleared the few people remaining at the encampments. The pipeline was finished and became fully operational in June this year. The lesson to take away from this is that reforms and concessions can be won through struggle, but under capitalism, they will always be under attack. Even if Adani is stopped, capitalism's relentless drive for profit will always put our planet at risk. That's why we need to fundamentally change the structure of society in order to save the environment. Most climate scientists acknowledge that some effects of climate change are already irreversible. 2016 was the hottest year on record, beating 2015 before that. We have seen unprecedented extreme weather just in the last 3 months. This year has seen the most destructive Atlantic hurricane season ever. Everyone here, I think, would have seen news footage of the devastation in Puerto Rico, in other Caribbean islands, and in Houston and Texas. The damage bill is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. How far these effects go and how well we can manage and respond to them is still an open question. What is clear is that capitalism is completely incapable of coordinating an international planned response to deal with this crisis. It has been 25 years since the 1992 United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, where climate change was put on the agenda in a major way. The UN is made up of rival capitalist powers, each seeking to help their own corporations dominate the global market. It's hardly surprising that these elites have been unable to keep themselves and their friends in check. None of the international agreements that have followed, including the 2015 Paris Agreement, come close to spelling out the radical change that is absolutely necessary. The capitalist market is ruthless. Big business has shown they will always put their money where they can make the most profit. What happens to everyone else doesn't even enter the picture. Research just earlier this year showed that only 150 corporations are responsible for 70% of carbon emissions globally. This is just one example of how the profit motive ignores socialized environmental and health costs. While it's true that renewables have slowly become more profitable in recent years, it is happening much too slowly. The market is not delivering the large-scale investment into renewable energy infrastructure that is desperately required. Every step of the way, progress is being blocked by the power of the entrenched fossil fuel industry and its stranglehold over politics. The only way forward is a democratically planned socialist economy. This would mean taking the big monopolies in the mining and energy sectors into public hands. The major banks, the distribution chains, and other major corporations would also be nationalized. Public control of this wealth and infrastructure would mean the massive profits of these companies could be reinvested to benefit the community. A program to build huge solar and wind farms as part of a publicly owned energy network would create thousands of jobs and provide cheap or free energy to consumers. Dead industry, like abandoned car manufacturing outlets, could be refitted for manufacturing solar panels or building new public transport, for example. Teaching these skills and carrying out new research would mean opening up massive technical and science schools. A socialist economy could also make real preparations to deal with the crisis of climate change. More research is still needed to know exactly the scope of what we're dealing with. But, for example, it may be necessary to relocate large numbers of people if land becomes uninhabitable. This could be done in an organized way that guarantees people quality homes, jobs, and lives. It would, of course, not be enough to do this in one country. Climate change demands an international response. Our struggle is global. That's why we, in the Socialist Party, are organised in 50 countries around the world in the Committee for a Workers' International. The environmental movement must adopt a socialist outlook if it is to be effective. We need to build mass movements and a socialist alternative to the corrupt major parties. Our planet has almost reached its limits. There's not much time left. On that note, I'll leave it there and we can draw out some of these points in the discussion. Thank you.